In this podcast episode, Ben Shapiro discusses the recent incident where an active duty Air Force member set himself on fire in front of the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C., to protest the war in Gaza. The individual, Aaron Bushnell, was a disturbed anarchist who publicly identified as such. This raises questions about the screening process for the American military, as it seems that the standards have been dropping. Bushnell's actions were extreme and tragic, as he burned himself alive while shouting, "Free Palestine," and later died in the hospital. Bushnell's background reveals that he was raised in a cult religious compound and later associated with radical anarchist groups. He expressed his outrage over the lack of response to protests and engaged in activities to support causes he believed in. His final note before his death indicated his commitment to protesting against what he perceived as genocide in Gaza. However, his beliefs and actions were based on misinformation and a skewed understanding of the situation in Gaza. Despite the disturbing nature of Bushnell's actions, some individuals and media outlets have portrayed him as a hero. Figures like Jill Stein, Cornel West, and Bernie Sanders have praised his sacrifice and commitment to justice. This glorification of a tragic and misguided act sets a dangerous precedent as it incentivizes individuals to engage in extreme actions for causes they believe in, regardless of the consequences. Shapiro highlights another case where a playwright, Victor Cazares, stopped taking their HIV medication as a form of protest against the New York Theater Workshop's stance on Gaza. This performative activism, aimed at garnering attention and support for a cause, is becoming increasingly common among radical leftists. The media's coverage of such actions further reinforces the idea that extreme measures are justified in pursuit of social justice. The media's response to incidents like Bushnell's self-immolation and Cazares' medication protest reflects a larger trend of bias and ideological alignment. Shapiro points out that the media's narrative is driven by radical leftist ideologies, which shape public perception and influence societal norms. This bias creates a double standard where certain actions are praised or condemned based on political beliefs rather than objective morality. Shapiro highlights Biden's inability to take clear positions on foreign policy issues, particularly in the context of the conflict in the Gaza Strip. He criticizes Biden for trying to split the baby by attempting to negotiate a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas without clearly articulating America's interests in the region. Shapiro points out that Biden's lack of clarity and transparency only served to create more confusion and instability in the region. Shapiro also calls out Biden for misrepresenting Israel's government as extreme and right-wing. He clarifies that Israel is currently governed by a war cabinet, which includes members from different political parties, and that attributing the conflict to Israel's government is misleading. Shapiro emphasizes that Israel's actions are in response to ongoing attacks from Hamas and are aimed at protecting its citizens from terrorism. Shapiro discusses Biden's plan for post-war Gaza, which involves integrating Hamas into the Palestinian Authority government. He points out that this plan is unrealistic and dangerous, as Hamas is a terrorist organization that poses a threat to both Israel and the Palestinian people. Shapiro criticizes Biden for pushing for a ceasefire without addressing the root causes of the conflict and for failing to recognize the complexities of the situation in the region. Shapiro highlights Biden's unpopularity as a result of his incoherent foreign policy decisions and lack of clear leadership. He points out that Biden's attempts to rehabilitate his image through appearances on talk shows like Seth Meyers are falling flat, as his confusion and lack of charisma are evident to the public. Shapiro emphasizes that Biden's mixed signals and inability to articulate a clear vision for America's role in the world are contributing to his declining approval ratings. Shapiro mentions a Harvard-Harris poll showing Trump's approval rating in positive territory, while Biden's is underwater by 11 points. He emphasizes the importance of Biden's approval ratings and the potential impact on the upcoming election. Shapiro questions the purpose of a potential government shutdown, noting that Americans typically do not support such actions. He discusses the lack of substantive changes that result from shutdowns and the need for significant restructuring of entitlement programs to address the national debt. He expresses skepticism about the effectiveness of a shutdown in the current political climate and questions the motives behind such actions. Shapiro discusses Gavin Newsom's support for unrestricted abortion, noting the conflicting views within the Democratic Party on reproductive rights. He criticizes Newsom's stance on late-term abortion and highlights the party's struggles with defining basic concepts related to gender and human life. Shapiro points out the inconsistencies in the party's positions on IVF and abortion, emphasizing the need for a more nuanced approach to these complex ethical issues. Shapiro briefly mentions conflicting reports on the death of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, indicating ongoing tensions between Ukraine and Russia. He does not delve deeply into this topic, but acknowledges the significance of the geopolitical situation in Eastern Europe.